long before the sky dimmed and the last cities collapsed into skeletal remains. The world still carried a quiet heartbeat buried beneath its ruins. In the fading years after the Great Extinguishing, when most of the stars had burned out and the heavens themselves seemed to grieve, a lone wanderer crossed the wastelands with a calmness that did not belong to such a broken age. He had no remembered name, and no home tethered him to any direction, yet he walked with the strange certainty of someone answering a call older than the dust beneath his feet. The land stretched in a permanent bronze haze that softened everything into silhouettes of what once had been. Shattered mountain ranges leaned like fractured ribs against the sky. Forests stood as hollow, ashen spines stripped of life. Plains swallowed the remnants of collapsed towers and rusted monuments, quietly absorbing the bones of civilizations long gone. Rivers had receded into thin, silver traces that clung to the cracked earth as if ashamed of their own dwindling existence. Through all of it, the wanderer moved without hesitation, driven by an instinct he could feel but never fully name. Across his shoulder hung a weathered satchel, its fabric thinned by decades of storms and silent winters. Inside it rested crystalline shards filled with fragments of starlight from an age when the sky still breathed. During long nights, he sometimes held them close and watched their faint glow wrap around his fingers, reminding him that not every spark in creation had died. Each shard pulsed like a weak heartbeat, each one carrying a memory that did not always belong to him. Their light flickered with a kind of awareness, as though they longed to return to the home they had been taken from. His past existed only in scattered impressions, drifting like smoke in his mind. He remembered a temple carved deep into the spine of a mountain, a dark throne encircled by silent figures, and a great hourglass filled with celestial sand counting down ages older than recorded history. Above all of it burned an impossibly brilliant star bound in golden chains. The vision was so vivid that it sometimes bled into waking moments, pulling him inward. Yet whenever he reached for clarity, the scene dissolved into shadows, leaving behind only the weight of belonging to something vast and important, something he had failed or abandoned. During his years of wandering, he crossed paths with a few surviving tribes living in scattered pockets of shelter carved from the ruins. They watched him with awe and fear, recognizing the faint, luminescent aura that clung to him. Rumors spread of a figure who carried dying stars in his satchel. Some believed he was a harbinger of omens. Others whispered that he was a revenant from the first age. Many simply avoided him, convinced that anyone who walked unharmed through poisoned winds carried curses beyond misfortune. None stayed long enough to understand the truth. He never despised their fear. He carried his own, hidden beneath layers of silence. His dreams often clawed at him with visions of chambers filled with falling starlight, prophecies carved into stone, armies kneeling beneath a sky tearing open, and distant voices calling a name he could no longer remember. He feared that if the memories ever returned in full, they would destroy him. The world, however, had grown restless. Tremors began to shudder beneath the earth, subtle at first, then powerful enough to rattle entire valleys and awaken ancient beasts buried beneath scorched ground. The bronze haze thickened until even midday felt like twilight. At night, strange lights spiraled along the horizon as if the sky itself was struggling to breathe after centuries of suffocation. With every shift, the shards in his satchel pulsed harder, responding to something far beyond his understanding. One night, while winds moaned through the hollow shells of forgotten towers, he stood on a cliff overlooking a vast metallic ocean. The water lay still as if frozen, reflecting the dim sky, without a single ripple. He lifted one of the shards and watched its glow intensify until it illuminated his entire hand. Warmth traveled through his veins and reached his chest in a steady wave. A resonance stirred in his mind, more a vibration than a voice, as though the shard carried an echo of consciousness. Images unfolded within him, revealing an ancient citadel buried under a continent's worth of debris. The sanctum of the last star. A stronghold that had once held the greatest vault of celestial knowledge ever created. He saw corridors adorned with sculptures carved from fallen stars, floating archives suspended in weightless chambers, and a central hall containing a device older than time. A machine forged from pure starlight, capable of igniting rebirth or sealing eternal night. The vision sharpened around a pedestal within the central chamber. It was empty. The missing shard, the final fragment, was the one he carried. In that moment, he realized his wandering had never been random. The shards had been guiding him. His memories had not faded through misfortune, but through intention. Something had hidden them to protect a truth capable of reshaping whatever life the world still clung to. As he closed his hand around the shard, a thin shimmer of light appeared far across the horizon. It was faint, almost swallowed by the haze, yet it awakened a tremor deep inside him. The forgotten path to the sanctum had begun to reveal itself. He stepped away from the cliff, leaving the silent ocean glinting behind him, and walked toward the rising storms with a renewed purpose. The land groaned under his feet, the sky trembled, and the shards whispered in rhythms older than memory. Somewhere beneath a buried mountain range, the sanctum waited. The last Starkeepers had vanished ages ago, but their legacy had not. And whether he wished it or not, the wanderer was about to learn that he was the final one. The storms rose in slow spirals that twisted across the horizon as the wanderer began the long journey east. Each passing day carried a weight that seemed to press down from the sky itself, as though the heavens leaned closer to witness his movement across the dying earth. Winds that once drifted harmlessly now tore across the plains with a ravenous force, lifting dust into towering pillars that resembled the restless spirits of forgotten ages. The air pulsed with a simmering tension, the unmistakable sign that the world sensed the return of forces buried for generations. He crossed territories where even the ruins appeared hesitant to stand. Colossal bridges collapsed under their own erosion, crumbling like brittle bones. Cities once alive with light lay swallowed under dunes of copper sand that shifted with unsettling precision, rearranging entire landscapes overnight. Through the rising chaos, he moved with unwavering resolve, guided by the pull of the shards and the silent visions they pressed into his mind. Every step drew him closer to the sanctum of the last star, a place spoken of in myths so old that even the oldest survivors retained only fragments of its name. The journey, relentless as it was, offered a strange serenity. Civilization's roar had faded into memory. Without its noise, the world became a canvas where each sound carried meaning. The wind sometimes echoed with illusions of laughter or distant bells, remnants of a past that refused to fully die. Yet the illusions dissolved quickly, leaving behind only the steady pulse of the shards and the shifting earth beneath his feet. With every mile, the memories clawed deeper. They surfaced in sharp bursts, triggered by the curvature of a fallen monument or the faint scent of incense buried under dust. One memory unfurled with brutal clarity as he entered a valley filled with petrified trees. Their trunks were frozen in contorted shapes, stretching toward a sky that had once promised salvation. Their elongated shadows crossed the cracked ground like crooked limbs, and in that forest of stone, the memory opened. He stood in a towering hall bathed in blue starlight. Columns forged from celestial iron ascended into darkness, their surfaces reflecting constellations that no longer existed. Warmth filled the air, carrying the echo of distant suns. He sensed movement around him, figures drifting through the glow, guardians whose presence demanded reverence. At the center of the hall hovered a colossal sphere suspended in the air, rotating in serene silence. The sphere pulsed with living light that shaped itself into galaxies, worlds, and dreams, revealing endless futures with every turn. He reached toward it, drawn by its boundless brilliance, but the memory disintegrated, leaving him once again in the cold valley beneath a frozen forest. He exhaled slowly and pressed on. The memories no longer wished to remain hidden. Each one arrived with sharper detail, revealing pieces of a life shaped by responsibility. The shards responded with brighter pulses, their light seeping through the satchel's worn fabric and illuminating his path when the haze choked out what little starlight remained. Nights in the wasteland carried an eerie stillness. The horizon rippled with distortions rising from the Earth's fractured core. The air tasted metallic, tainted by ancient minerals forced upward through cracks in the ground. He rested wherever the land allowed, often within the hollow remains of towers whose walls were still adorned with faded murals of celestial patterns and mythic beings carrying stars across realms. He wondered whether the artists had sensed their approaching end, or if the collapse had descended upon them without warning. At dawn, as he neared a region once marked on forgotten maps as the Crescent Expanse, the sky erupted with a phenomenon that halted him in his tracks. A massive arc of golden light stretched from the horizon, curving across the heavens like the tail of a fallen comet. It pulsed rhythmically, each pulse sending tremors through the land. The shards reacted violently, heating until the satchel smoked. He carried them with caution as the arc intensified. The ground split beneath the expanse, tearing open in jagged fractures that released shimmering mist into the sky. The mist coiled upward like serpents made of light. A memory stirred in him, not as an image but as a forgotten teaching. The awakening rift, a sign that the world's core channels had begun to stir again. The ancient energies sealed after the fall of the Starkeepers were rising, answering a force strong enough to reshape creation. He walked toward the arc of light. As the air thickened with energy, every step vibrated through the ground, as though the land recognized the return of a Starkeeper remnant. Even without his full memories, the old forces knew him. The world knew him, and it called him forward with a desperate urgency. At the heart of the crescent expanse stood a colossal dome, half buried beneath drifting sand. Its surface resembled the scaled armor of a celestial beast, metallic and iridescent beneath the glow of the golden arc. A long crack along its side exposed an entrance, partially collapsed, yet still navigable. He felt the unmistakable pull of fate emanating from within. Inside, the air was still and heavy with the scent of ancient incense. Tall pillars marked with faded engravings reached toward the fractured ceiling. At the center of the floor lay an emblem he recognized instantly, a spiral of 12 points, representing the fragments of the celestial cycle, the emblem of the Order of the Last Starkeepers. As he stepped into the spiral, the ground trembled. A low hum filled the chamber, resonating through his bones. The shards glowed fiercely, illuminating every fracture in the walls. Gravity seemed to shift, and then the floor began to descend, carrying him into the depths of the dome. A soft blue luminescence filled the lower chamber. Crystalline veins ran along the walls, pulsing with faint energy. At the center stood a pedestal of polished obsidian, supporting a translucent sphere filled with swirling remnants of starlight. The light moved in patterns that defied reason, forming shapes that resembled constellations lost to history. He approached with a sense of familiarity that ran deeper than memory. The moment his hand hovered above the sphere, a torrent of memories surged through him. He saw himself standing in the celestial council, surrounded by guardians robed in shimmering cloth. He shaped the light of newborn stars between his hands. He walked through the sanctum in its full glory, a fortress standing above the cosmos. He witnessed the beginning of the Great Extinguishing, stars collapsing in chained destruction across the universe. He saw himself sealing away the last fragments of celestial energy inside the shards, scattering them across the world, and entering a ritual that stripped him of his name, purpose, and identity to protect what remained. He staggered as the memories struck, each one stitching together the truth of who he had been. The chamber pulsed in response, awakened by his restored essence. The sphere brightened, surrounding him in a warm radiance. It projected visions along the walls, revealing the path ahead, filled with storms, ruins, guardians, and the looming shadow of something far more dangerous than extinction. The sanctum lay beyond mountains sharp as blades, forests warped by fractured time, and a sky preparing to open once more. Within it waited the device capable of reigniting creation. Yet another presence waited as well, something he had locked away along with his identity, now awakened the moment he reclaimed it. He stepped away as the sphere dimmed, acknowledging the start of the final journey. Above him, the dome groaned, lifting him toward the surface. He felt the weight of destiny settle upon him, heavy but familiar. His path was no longer one of wandering. It was a return. And every force awakening in the world understood exactly what that meant. When the dome lifted him back to the surface, the world above had shifted into something far more awakened than what he had left behind. The golden arc that once glowed faintly along the horizon had stretched into an immense halo, bending the sky into a crown of luminous curvature. The air vibrated with a constant hum, the slow exhale of a colossal engine stirring beneath continents. Tremors ran through the ground in steady intervals, each pulse resonating with the shards in his satchel. It felt as though the land had finally woken from an age of exhaustion and now watched him with deliberate attention. He stepped into the sweeping wind, its current carrying the scent of charged minerals and dust older than memory. Behind him, the dome sank once more beneath the drifting copper sands, quietly removing its presence from the living world as though unwilling to be seen by whatever force might follow him. He adjusted the weight of the satchel across his shoulder, ensuring the shards rested securely. Their warmth seeped through the worn fabric and into his skin, coaxing fragmented memories into sharper clarity. The return of his identity no longer came in scattered flashes. It was steady now, a mosaic assembling itself with purpose. He remembered the halls of the sanctum carved from luminous stone, remembered the vow spoken by the order to preserve the final sparks of creation should the universe ever drown in darkness. He remembered the faces of those who entrusted him with a burden no one else could carry. And he remembered the silence that fell over the heavens when the Great Extinguishing began, worlds disappearing like embers crushed beneath a vast and merciless hand. The catastrophe had never been the product of dying stars. It had been the arrival of a presence that fed on light itself. That same coldness churned now along the far edges of the sky. The land was not trembling in fear of him. It trembled in recognition of the thing that followed. He moved east across the widening expanse. Jagged mountains rose ahead, their peaks like the shattered teeth of ancient titans. Under the dim sky, they shimmered with faint silver hints, as though celestial minerals slept deep within their cores. The wasteland stretched between him and the mountains in an unbroken sweep of cracked stone and drifting haze, but he felt no uncertainty. The shards kept pulling him forward, guiding him toward a point the world had been waiting to reveal. The terrain shifted as he neared the mountain range. Obsidian fields sprawled across the land, their glassy surfaces reflecting the sky in warped fragments. In some places, faint blue veins glowed beneath the dark stone, pulsing in rhythm with his steps like constellations awakening underfoot. The patterns mirrored the celestial charts once etched into the sanctum's archives. Slowly he realized the truth. The world had been shaped as a map long before civilizations fell, its formations etched with guidance only a Starkeeper could understand. At the base of the mountains, the earth shuddered. Stone plates slid beneath one another and rearranged like colossal mechanisms responding to a forgotten command. An ancient path emerged from beneath layers of dust and debris, glowing softly with pale starlight. The mountain accepted him, but the acceptance carried a tension, as though it braced against a pressure pushing back from the unseen side of its walls. He ascended the revealed trail. The air grew thin and sharp, cold enough to crystallize the breath from his lips. Overhead, the sky shifted into swirling shades of violet and silver. Lightning whispered within the clouds, illuminating narrow ravines between the peaks in silent bursts of light. Storms circled the ridge, but never crossed into the path. The shards in his satchel heated, their energy restless with anticipation. Midway up the mountain, the trail opened into a vast plateau carved into the cliff face. Across it rose an immense structure unlike any he remembered, though the sight stirred recognition deep within him. It resembled a cathedral sculpted from condensed starlight, its surface shifting between translucence and shimmering reflection. Towers rose into the sky like frozen pillars of celestial fire, and a soft hum pulsed from within its core, steady and ancient. He approached the structure with deliberate steps. The moment he crossed onto the plateau, the cathedral responded. Its surface rippled gently, as though awakening from deep slumber. Constellation symbols bloomed across its walls, their patterns stretching and reshaping to reveal memories carved into the cosmos long before the Great Extinguishing. He placed his hand upon the radiant surface and felt the entire cathedral ignite with recognition. Memories surged through him. He saw himself within this place, the beacon nexus, one of the anchoring pillars that once stabilized the pathways between distant realms. It had allowed the Starkeepers to move across creation in a heartbeat, maintaining balance across worlds that now existed only as dust. Only those attuned to the shards could activate it. And now he was the last one capable of waking it fully. The shards shivered violently, reacting to the beacon nexus with a mix of urgency and longing. At the center of the plateau, a circular platform rose from the stone. Its surface held a carved starburst design spiraled into 12 arcs. The pattern waited for the missing fragment he carried. He withdrew the brightest shard. It pulsed with fierce intensity, its glow climbing up his fingers as though straining toward the nexus. When he raised it above the center of the starburst, the platform erupted in radiant waves. The cathedral trembled as dormant systems awakened, energy surging through walls that had not felt power in millennia. And then the sky split. A jagged rupture tore across the heavens above the mountains, spilling a violent torrent of light and shadow. The air shook with a deep, grinding sound, the echo of collapsing realms. Through the tear descended a presence he had prayed would never return, a sphere of void wrapped in spirals of dark energy, feeding hungrily on the remnants of the golden ark. It carried no face, no shape, yet its hunger was unmistakable. A remnant of the devourer, the same cosmic force that had consumed the stars during the Great Extinguishing. It had followed the awakening energy of the shard, drawn to the revival of ancient power. The void sent tendrils downward, each one reaching toward the mountain with deliberate intent. The beacon nexus pulsed in alarm, its light growing unstable. The shard flickered in his grasp, torn between its duty to the nexus and its instinct to defend against the approaching remnant. Darkness spread across the plateau. The mountain groaned beneath the pressure. The cathedral radiated with blinding intensity, its system straining to remain active. In that moment, he understood with absolute clarity that reaching the sanctum would not be a journey of discovery. It would be a confrontation with the force that had once unmade creation itself. A confrontation he had fought before. A confrontation he had lost. But now he carried the final fragments. Now he remembered what he had been. And now the world had awakened its ancient pathways. The remnant descended lower, its shadow swallowing the plateau in a single sweep. The beacon nexus surged, preparing to open a pathway only he could control. And he knew that the next step he took would decide the fate of whatever remained of the universe. The heavens convulsed as the remnant descended, dragging the sky into a spiraling abyss that stripped every trace of color from the world. Thunder rolled through the upper atmosphere, like the last cry of a dying cosmos. The mountain trembled beneath the Starkeeper's feet, shaking loose enormous slabs of ancient stone that fell away like discarded memories, plunging into the mist-choked depths below. The beacon nexus fought to remain awake, its luminous spires bending inward as if bracing against invisible pressure, their surfaces shedding bursts of starlight that clashed against the creeping darkness spilling from the rift overhead. At the center of the collapsing plateau, he stood anchored, the shard burning in his grasp as though its core had become a sun determined to live a few moments longer. Each pulse from the shard carried the weight of forgotten civilizations, all silently begging for the light that had been stolen from them. Their presence pressed against him in waves of longing, urging him to remember not only what he once guarded, but the reason he had surrendered everything to safeguard the last embers of creation. Memory rose through him with the calm certainty of dawn, no longer scattered or faint. It arrived as a single, unified force that illuminated his past with overwhelming clarity. He remembered the highest chamber of the sanctum, the celestial core suspended in its cradle of crystalline spines. He remembered the first star's essence channeled into a device built to rekindle creation itself. And above all, he remembered the inscription that circled the chamber in ancient luminous script. The core could only be awakened when its chosen bearer restored the fullness of their own identity, for the device recognized memory as the purest form of truth. Without identity, the core would remain dormant, unable to ignite the dying universe. He had not scattered the shards only to hide them from the devourer. He had scattered himself. Every piece of his identity had been sealed within those fragments, bound in starlight, so they could survive what his mind could not. The universe had demanded a sacrifice of self, and he had obeyed. The shards inside the satchel responded to the final restoration of his memory. Their glow surged outward, filling the plateau with a rich warmth that carved through the remnant's creeping shadow. The void recoiled, curling its tendrils as if wounded. The retreat lasted only an instant before the remnant surged again, widening the tear in the sky and shaping its spirals into blades of darkness. It sought not the shards alone, but the beacon that threatened to reopen pathways the creature had spent ages sealing with its hunger. The Starkeeper lifted the central shard toward the nexus just as the remnant struck. The ground jolted under the impact, scattering the smaller fragments across the broken plateau. They rolled between fractures in the stone like fleeting sparks. He lunged after them, gathering each fragment with careful urgency, while the void creature's tendrils tore at the mountain in sweeping arcs that turned entire columns of rock into dust. The Cathedral of Starlight fought to channel its awakening energies, its spires flickering wildly as ancient mechanisms strained to align themselves. The remnant's second strike broke a vast portion of the plateau, swallowing it in a single surge of darkness. The force hurled him backward. His body met the jagged stone wall with a brutal impact that sent shockwaves through his bones, but he did not release the shards. Their combined glow radiated through him, merging into a single current of light that wrapped around his arms and surged into his chest with a clarity that cut through the chaos. He felt himself whole for the first time since the Great Extinguishing began. not a wanderer without a name, not a survivor drifting through ruins, not a fractured remnant of a fallen order. He felt the weight and certainty of his true existence settle into place like a constellation returning to its rightful pattern. He was the last Starkeeper, the singular guardian entrusted to ignite the core when all other stars had failed. The burden had been his because no one else possessed a will disciplined enough to shatter identity across the ages and still rise to reclaim it. The mountain groaned as the remnant lunged downward, its presence colder than the void between galaxies. Its hunger reached for him with the inevitability of collapsing gravity. Yet the shards moved before he could react. A column of pure starlight erupted from his chest, piercing the sky with a brilliance that cut through the creature's spirals. The remnant reeled, writhing as the light tore into the essence it had stolen from countless suns. The rift quaked in shock, convulsing like a wounded wound in the fabric of existence. The beacon nexus seized its moment. Energy surged through its structure, and the carved starburst at the center of the plateau rotated with ancient precision, unlocking a mechanism buried deep within the planet's crust. A cylindrical column rose from the heart of the platform, its surface spinning with constellations that shifted into alignment. It was the convergence axis, the final key needed to open the path to the sanctum. He placed the shard into its core. Reality changed. The plateau dissolved beneath his feet, replaced by a radiant bridge of light that stretched across a vast cosmic abyss. Galaxies swirled beneath him like rivers of luminous dust, their spirals forming pathways toward a structure rising out of the void. The sanctum appeared as a floating citadel forged from crystallized creation, its towers orbiting a central sphere that glowed with slow, rhythmic pulses. Pathways of cosmic energy flowed between the towers in steady currents, illuminating the cathedral-like forms that once housed the greatest order of guardians the universe had ever known. He crossed the bridge toward the sanctum. Each step strengthened the resonance between the shards and the distant core. The gates opened with a deep vibration that sent ripples through the surrounding constellations. The interior chambers glowed with living starlight. Carvings along the walls showed the rise of worlds, the expansion of the cosmos, and the long vigil maintained by the Starkeepers. Every mural welcomed him, like a memory long buried but never forgotten. He walked into the heart of the citadel, where the celestial core hovered above a crystalline pedestal. The sphere shimmered with nested galaxies, each orbiting in frozen silence. Pulses of light moved across its surface in slow waves, sensing his presence with longing that resonated through the chamber. As he approached, the core brightened in recognition, expanding its aura as though relieved that its guardian had finally returned. But the return had not gone unnoticed. The remnant tore through the closing rift behind him, collapsing through the sanctum's ceiling in a storm of spiraling shadows. The citadel quaked violently as the creature flooded the chamber with void storms that twisted the air into turbulent waves. Yet the core remained untouched, drawing strength from the Starkeeper's presence as its pulse climbed toward awakening. He placed the final shard against the core. The universe breathed in, then exhaled. Light burst outward in a surge that flooded the sanctum, sweeping through every corridor and carving itself into the air like a second dawn. It streaked through the void creatures' spirals, tearing them apart one by one until the remnants' monstrous shape fractured into dissolving shadows. Its screams reverberated across the cosmos as its essence unraveled, reduced to drifting fragments of darkness that scattered like dust before a rising sun. It attempted to retreat into the rift, but the core's light reached it faster and extinguished it completely. The rift sealed with a thunderous crack. The celestial core ignited in full radiance, sending a column of rebirth across the universe. Its eruption swept across continents, across mountains, across every wound left by the Great Extinguishing. The bronze haze dissolved from the world below as newborn constellations bloomed across the heavens. One star flared into existence, then another, followed by countless more until the sky shimmered with endless lights. Whole nebulae blossomed into color. Worlds that had slipped into dormancy stirred with renewed energy. Forgotten suns rekindled their flames and cast warmth across the realms they once illuminated. The universe healed. The Starkeeper stood before the core as its brilliance enveloped him. The warmth of countless stars flowed into him as if greeting an old friend. The shards dissolved into the core's radiance, returning to the place they had been born. He felt his consciousness expand outward, merging with the luminous currents that threaded through every star, every world, every breath of creation. There was no fear in the transformation, only serenity, only return, only completion. He became the light he once protected, a guiding presence woven into the fabric of the reborn universe. The cycle he had vowed to preserve embraced him, granting him passage across the stars as their eternal guardian. Below, the world awakened under a newborn sky. Survivors emerged from their shelters and lifted their eyes to a single constellation burning at the heart of the heavens. It shone brighter than all others, shaped like a shard of celestial fire, its glow steady and warm. None remembered the name of the one who had saved them, yet they felt the truth of his presence in the radiance of every sunrise and in every whisper of hope drifting along the wind. They lived because he had walked through ruins and carried shattered stars. They thrived because he had chosen to remember. They flourished because he had embraced the final sacred burden of creation. The last Starkeeper had fulfilled his destiny, and the universe would forever hold his light.